So the compromise is in that it's no longer just about me. I have people that I've made promises to, fans, hey, yeah, I'm going to write that book and it's coming. So now I have to take them into consideration. And again, that's part of moving from the hobbyist mentality to the professional mentality,
Welcome to the Author Like a Boss podcast, the podcast for indie authors who want to improve their writing, up-level their marketing, make money with their books, and have fun doing it. Now, onto the show with your host, Ella Barnard.
Hey, boss. If you are starting on your author journey but are nervous about marketing, then I've got something special for you. I've just released a book called Start Marketing Your Book. In it, I share fundamental marketing principles and simple, actionable steps that you can take right now. For less than a cup of coffee, you could actually have everything you need to start selling more books. To buy the book, go to authorlikeaboss.com/start marketing. Hey, bosses. Hello, everybody. We are here today with Chuck, but his writing name is C. Stephen Manley. And he has been and done quite a few things in his life. But now he writes books and tries in vain to keep up with his children. Chuck, I think that is, I didn't tell you this before because I wanted to save it. I think that is one of my favorite bios ever.
Well, it's incredibly accurate. So. I'm an old man. Those guys are young and fast. I'm old and slow. It just doesn't, it's hard to keep track of them.
Well, I believe that. But my favorite part is that he has been and done quite a few things.
Yeah.
I'm like, there's been stuff that's been done. Oh, man. Okay, so tell us a little bit about yourself because your bio didn't say specifically. It was a little bit vague, but that's okay. Yes. So can you tell us a little bit about your author journey, where you started and where you are now, and the process?
Oh, well, if you can possibly do this, cast your mental wayback machines to about 1975. And yeah. And I was about 8 years old at the time, and I was living in Pasadena, Texas, and it was around Halloween, and my teacher gave the class an assignment to write a Halloween-themed short story. So I wrote a short story about my class going to an Old West ghost town, and everybody but me disappeared, and I was the lone child left alone to solve the mystery of what happened to my class. And the teacher read it and liked it so much, she read it to the class and then took it over to the other class that was the same grade as me and read it to that class. And that teacher liked it so much, she took it to the principal and he stapled it up on the little corkboard outside the lunchroom. So as all the kids were walking into the lunchroom, they had a chance to look up at this thing and read my story while they were waiting to get in to get their lunches. So I've had the bug since. I've been writing roughly for 42 years now. And I did the whole publishing submission rejection tango all through the late 80s and 90s, got frustrated with it and kind of fed up with stuff. I met a writer who had successfully published, and this was like 96, 97, and he started telling me about the business side of the industry, which I didn't really know that much about at the time. And, he said that he would get maybe 20% of a check once it left the publisher's hands and got to him by the time it went through, agents and the publisher's lawyers and all this stuff. I mean, he was just telling me how. And I don't write because I'm trying to get rich. I write because I love telling stories. And at that point in time, I was of the opinion that, I'm going to write regardless. So why put myself through all this frustration when I can write stories for my friends and family and they'll enjoy them and I'm okay with that. I have artist friends that I would write short stories to go along with their paintings, so they go to the guy's shows and they'd see his paintings and pick up the story and read the story that accompanied it, that kind of thing. I found that very satisfying. And, I would write role-playing scenarios for my gaming friends. And, those were creative outlets, storytelling outlets that I used until 2014, when a buddy of mine suggested I submit something to this vampire anthology. And I wrote something and I sent it in. It was promptly rejected. But during the course of doing that, I discovered KDP. And I was like, wow, I can actually put my books in the world my way without having to go through gatekeepers and get other people's permission. And, that was a very big deal to me. So since 2014, I've written, counting a short story collection, I think 7 books. I have a completed trilogy up now, 2 books in the space opera series, and 1 book in my new dark urban fantasy series. That's kind of my current project. So I started when I was 8. I've written a ton of stuff. I've been through a lot of jobs in the military and stuff since then. And like I said, I've kind of been and done a lot of things, and through it all, I was a writer. So I hope that answers that question sufficiently.
Yeah, it does. I really love that. I could tell when you started that you're going to be a great storyteller.
Well, thank
I was
you.
like, this guy knows how to tell a good story.
I've been practicing at it for a while.
Yeah, I love hearing how people, they're like, I got the bug at 8. And they're like, since then. I'm really curious, and this is just me and my curiosity with the stories that went with the art.
Yeah.
Can you just, and that might not be the thing that most people like dive into, but I'm like, I am so curious about that. Like your artist friends, and what did you do? Like, yeah.
Yeah. I tend to, most of what I write, not everything, but if I just relax and start telling a story, I do tend to go a little dark. I cut my teeth when I read, I think it was when I was about the same age as when I wrote that first story. I stole my mother's copy of Salem's Lot, Stephen King book, because she didn't want me to read it. So I knew she was done with it, and I just took it off her bedside table and read it in secret. And that's who I cut my teeth on. I cut my teeth on like Stephen King, Peter Straub, Dean Koontz, Robert McGammon, all the big horror big dogs back in the late 70s, early 80s. And so now when I write, I do tend to sprinkle some horror in there just because that's what I'm comfortable with. Well, my friend who did the art shows, he was the same way, but he did paintings. So he would have like these kind of creepy paintings. For instance, one of them was the painting was someone holding up a knife with bloodstained edges, and then you could see their eyes reflected in the blade, and they're on like a country road or something. So I wrote a story about a guy that went insane trying to find someone. And the last line of the story is that scene, him looking at his own reflection in there and goes, "Oh, there you are." So that kind of thing. There was one with a baby surrounded by ravens. And I wrote a story about that where it actually, at the end of that story, the ravens end up being the baby's protectors. So
okay, I got nervous like for a second.
No,
I was like, oh shoot. Did I take this podcast real dark?
When I was in college in California, and I actually got kicked out of an English class because I got into it with the professor because he made us read a story about infanticide. And that was way too.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm like, you're like, there was one with a baby.
Dude,
and I was like,
I have lines, and that's over it, buddy.
Okay. So, I don't know if you found this to be true or not, or I'm taking us on a little bit of a veering off track a little bit, but I really like dark. Like, I'm a bubbly personality, Chuck. But
I hadn't noticed.
But when I read, when I read, I like it darker, like pretty. Some people would probably think pretty dark. And so have you found, when you have fans or you yourself or in your life, have you found that people don't always expect, like you don't always expect what they might be reading or not?
Absolutely. And I'll be honest with you, some of the nicest and funniest people I've ever met were dark fantasy or horror writers, people that like things darker in their entertainment. But I've also discovered that, okay, like myself, again, I will watch shows about vampires or like Stranger Things with the monsters and the alternate dimensions. I'll watch all this stuff and I will just absorb it. I love it. I love it all the fantastic and the crazy and the scary, all of that stuff. But if you want to scare me, put a serial killer movie in front of me. Because I've found that people that like the fantastic stuff, they like it because it's comforting because you know it's not real.
Mm-hmm.
But you put the real scary stuff, the crap that could actually be out there, and they get a lot less comfortable with it. That's actually what I learned from getting kicked out of that English class about myself.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think I agree with you 100%. Especially, I was single for a long time. And so I would try to find shows that I could watch, but they couldn't be too scary. Because I was like, because then I'm going to bed by myself. And I'm like, at one point I was watching Dexter. My sister's like, it's really dark, but good. It's dark, but good. And then there was one episode, probably everybody knows which one, where I just had to close my laptop and I was like, okay, that's it, done. I can't watch any more of the shows.
There's a couple of those that could have qualified for that.
Well, probably pretty early on. I didn't get through season 1.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm going to go to bed by myself, and I don't feel like doing that after watching this show. I wanted to ask you, so where are you getting now that you're not writing in concert with this artist, you're writing by yourself, but where do you get your ideas and how do you then put them onto the paper?
Well, I'm a firm believer that ideas are everywhere. Mm-hmm. All you have to do is keep your eyes open and ask questions. You know, if something catches your eye, if you hear a fact, if you see someone who has a unique look about them, look at that thing and say, well, who is that? Why are they dressed that way? Why are they walking that way? What are they doing while they're sitting there? And instead of trying to find factual answers for those questions, you make up your answers. And that's where your stories come from. You know, that's where you come up with, you know, one of my favorite things to do is just sit in Starbucks and like people watch and make up my stories for who these people are. You know, I've just yesterday or the day before yesterday, I was actually sitting in a Starbucks and there was a group of ladies having, you know, just a coffee meeting, get together, whatever. But I decided they were all sitting there deciding how best to murder their husbands and give each other alibis. And I kind of put this whole thing in my head. So it's about keeping an open mind to story possibilities and just paying attention to the world around you. My most recent novel, Master of Hounds, I actually covered this in the author's note at the end. But my best friend and I were downtown in my hometown of Huntsville, and we were walking across the square to this bar we like called Sip. And we were just talking, and I was telling him about a field trip my daughter had recently taken to a tourist cave nearby, you know, called Cathedral Caverns near here. And he just offhandedly mentioned that there's actually a cave under the courthouse in my hometown. I'd never known that before. And by the time I'd finished my first bourbon and cigar, I had the whole idea for Master of Hounds plotted out in my head. And so I wrote the novel set in my hometown, and there's all kinds of magical stuff happening. And there's a cave under the courthouse with some stuff in it that nobody knew was there, and yada, yada, yada. So I really think that it's just a matter of paying attention and letting yourself, you know, letting the crazy train out of the station. You know, not every idea you have is going to be something you pursue to its final, you know, completion, but maybe every third one is. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's where I get them, pretty much everywhere.
Okay, that's awesome. I love. There's something about caves, just generally, but. There's something about caves, like this, like there's immediate mystery when there's a cave. I want to ask you, how do you choose which ones that you follow, which ideas you follow through to completion?
It used to just be strictly which one excited me most. What story did I want to tell the most? Which one did I get really revved up about? Now that I've gotten into KDP and I'm really starting to understand trying to turn a profit off of my creative endeavors, I do tend to consider, is this the best use? Is this story going to be a better use of my time with as far as trying to sell the book as this other story that I might be a little more excited about? So it's really a balancing act between desire and potential. And if you're going to go into this writing thing to make money, you have to have both those mindsets. And that's actually been the biggest adjustment for me since I started doing this, because up until now I just did whatever the hell I wanted and had fun with it. Mm-hmm. But now you do have to take the market into account. And like I said, most recent book, urban fantasy, it's a big competitive market, but people are always looking for new voices. I wrote it set in my hometown. I saw some potential there locally to be like, hey, look at this. There's never been a book written like this in this town. You know, that kind of thing. So you kind of have to weigh. Well, it's like the SPP guys are always saying, you got to know your why. Why would you want to rewrite this story over the other one? And you just go with the best why.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people. I'm curious. I want to ask you some more questions about that. But I think a lot of people, they are so passionate about their story, they don't complete. Like they just keep writing and never finish it. But that's not where I want to go with this. I want to go with. I want to ask how, as somebody who's been writing and storytelling for so long, how does it, I guess, feel? Sorry.
That's fine.
How does it feel?
Feelings are a thing.
Yeah, I know. How does it feel? How do you work with that? Do you feel like you're compromising, or do you feel good about it? Or what is, how is that working for you?
I don't feel like I'm compromising. It's actually kind of ironic that you asked that question, because I'm running. I don't run into problems I haven't had before very often these days. But like right now, I mentioned I have a space opera series, and I'm working on the third book in that series. And for whatever reason, I don't know, I can't figure it out, I don't want to write this book. I have people that like the series. I like the series. I like the characters. They're fun. It's very pulp, space opera, Han Solo kind of space adventure, which is exactly the books I wanted to write. But I started that series because after I finished my Paragons trilogy, the first thing I did in KDP, I wanted to do something I'd never done before. And I had never written anything with like spaceships and stuff in it. Mm-hmm. So the Brace Cordova books were born. But now that I'm further into it, I realize that I'm really more of a fantasy writer. I like science fiction. I love Star Trek, all that, watched all the series, binged them, still binging them. Mm-hmm. But I think I'm a better consumer of science fiction than I am creator. But so right now what I'm struggling with, the whole point of this is I'm having to force myself to write this book. And that's not something I've really ever dealt with before. And the compromise is that in the old days, I would have just been like, nobody cares. I'm gonna go write what I want to write and just can sit here and languish in obscurity forever. But now I have people asking me when this book's coming out. So the compromise is in that it's no longer just about me. I have people that I've made promises to, fans, hey, yeah, I'm going to write that book and it's coming. So now I have to take them into consideration. And again, that's part of moving from the hobbyist mentality to the professional mentality. Fans matter. And, but as far as, writing something because I think it's going to sell well, I don't ever just chase a trend or chase a market. I don't go and look at what's hot right now. Harem books are hot right now. I have nothing against harem books, but I'm not going to write one because that's not the kind of thing that I like to read. So what I will do, and I know you're a big fan. I know I listened to the last episode.
It's fine. I like a lot of stuff. I like
well
a
you
lot of
should.
stuff.
I encourage people to read a lot of stuff. But you see my point there.
Oh, yeah.
That's not my thing. So I'm not going to just go write that because it's selling well right now. You see?
Yeah.
So it's that, like I said, it's that balance between potential and desire. You gotta find what works for you and keep yourself interested.
Yeah. I think people that write with, well, I don't have anything to base this on, but I would like to think that creatives are writing with integrity about what they love. And if they can overlap that with what the market wants, then you have.
Right. I think, well, I mean, it's the, who is it? Richard Fox? Is it Richard Fox or Chris Fox? The whole right to
Chris
market
Fox.
thing.
There's a lot of, I thought about making my pen name end with Fox because I have interviewed
there's a lot of
successful authors with the last name Fox, and I'm like,
Foxy.
there's something here with that. I had a thought that I don't want to miss, which is
throw it out there.
Well, like I said earlier, I was single for a long time and I got to do whatever I wanted whenever I wanted. That was one of my favorite things about being single, is like, hey, do I want to go do this? Yes or no? It's all up to me. And I just could. But when you're in a partnership, obviously there's the other person to consider. And I really think, and this is the first time I've ever thought about entrepreneurs or business or authoring like this, but I love it, is when you start selling your books and you have, especially with a series, you're now like in a partnership.
Oh, absolutely.
with your audience.
Yeah.
Because you can't just do what you want to do anymore. I mean, you can, but you're going to hurt the people.
Right. I mean, even if you choose to bow out of something, you have to do it in a way that is satisfying. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
You have to have a really good method of bowing out. Because once I finish that space opera series, I don't know that I'd ever go back to it.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not going to just like throw out a piece of crap that just kind of wraps everything up just so I can wrap everything up, because I don't want anybody walking away from my books feeling like they didn't get their money's worth. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
It's reading. I consider myself a drug dealer, and the drug I'm pushing is escapism. I want people to pick up my books and for however long they read them, forget about the fact the rent's overdue, forget about the fact their mom's sick, forget about the fact they hate their job, just forget about whatever parts of their life they don't like and just get lost in the story. That's the drug that I'm pushing. And I don't ever want somebody to come away from one of my stories not having achieved that. So, it really is a partnership with your audience. It's like being in a play. The books are the stage play that you're putting on for this auditorium full of people, and they agree to pay attention and you agree to entertain. And, that's where that partnership comes into play. So I really look at the people that read my books as partners in the process. And if I write something they hate, they'll tell me, and I won't write that anymore. Fortunately, that hasn't happened yet, except for one person who gave me a 1-star on my most recent book. And wow, he really hated it.
Hey, congratulations. I feel like until you get somebody who really hates stuff, like, I feel like that makes you like a real author.
Yeah, the day it happened, it was actually the very first review I got on that book. I got on I got on chat with the Keystroke guys, and I was like, "Hey, I made it. 7 books in, and I finally got a 1-star, and I'm a real writer now." And we had a big laugh over it. I mean, it's going to happen, and there are plenty. And I think the bigger you get, the more of them you get, because there are people out there who just want to give 1-star reviews on things. Mm-hmm. I got a great review the other day, and the first line the guy wrote was, "Okay, I usually only leave reviews to warn people off of books." Huh. And I'm like, dude, if you like an author,
Yeah.
Leave reviews. We need those a lot. Don't just leave crappy ones to warn other people off. Help out the ones you like too.
Yeah,
I mean,
if you like the book, give them a
that's another
kudos.
aspect of that partnership thing, you know?
Yeah. I wanted to. Yeah, good. I only leave good reviews. If I don't like something, I don't leave a review because I'm like, this is like
I will only leave a bad review if it's obvious that the person wasn't even trying. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I mean, if it's just, because I've come across a couple of books like that where you could, I've read plenty of indie books where this guy had a good idea and he tried, but his skill level just wasn't up to the story he was trying to tell. But you could tell he was really putting some effort into it. And then I've seen ones where they were just stuffing words in there so they could make, page reads or whatever. I don't know. But those books, I will definitely call.
You're like, I'm calling you out, fellow author.
Yeah, because that's, well, even people who may not be at the skill level they need to be at to really tell a big story, they're putting their heart and soul into it and really trying to do the best they can. And I got nothing but respect for that. But people who are just trying to game the system and stuff like that, no. There's too many folks out there trying to do it right for me to just quietly let those people, do their thing. So that's my rationale on that.
I'm cool with that rationale. I wanted to ask how I keep taking us back because we keep veering off, but I like the way our conversations are going. I'm like, wait, but I didn't get to ask that one thing.
You gotta take a cattle prod to me.
No, it's okay. I'm going there with you, but I want to ask, how are you going to write this third book in the Brace Cordova series?
I am basically what I'm doing is, because I have some other projects on my plate too. That's what I'm calling my front burner book right now. And I will spend, say, 3 or 4 days a week writing on that. And then I've got a short story I need to do for the Keystroke Medium anthology. And I'm doing the pre-work for the second book in my Pickman Files series. And so what I'll do is I spend some time on the other stuff to sort of, so my head space is not locked into this, okay, I have to write this book kind of attitude, so I sort of reward myself for sticking with the space opera by letting myself work on the fantasy stuff, which I just, again, they're not bad books. I like the characters. They're fun, but I don't know, for some reason I enjoy writing the fantasy stuff more. And the Brace Cordova books aren't really that dark either. So that may have something to do with it because they're very much like Indiana Jones in space kind of thing. So there's not a lot of monsters and horror and that kind of stuff. And like I said before, I'm really a little more comfortable with the darker stuff. So maybe that's the problem I have it with. Maybe I need to make them a little darker. I don't know.
Yeah, I was just curious because I think a lot because being a professional, it's okay. So you've promised this book to your fans, but you don't want to write it. So what you're doing is reward. You're like tricking. I love tricking myself to do stuff that I don't really want to do. I'm like, so you're rewarding yourself in reverse by letting yourself write fantasy, get into a mindset of writing, and then.
Yeah, it's like I tell my kids all the time, do what you have to do what you want to do. And I'm making the Cordova book the have to so that I can, work on the quote unquote fun. It's all fun. I mean, don't get me wrong. I don't ever want to do anything else in my life, but some things are more fun than others.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I was just thinking that. I'm like, well, it's not like work. It is work, but you're right. At home and you're writing. So
I'm in my pajamas for crying out loud right now.
So what is your writing process when you're doing this?
You mean process? Did you say process?
Yeah, or process.
Process.
I'm gonna go with
Basically,
process.
What I do is I like to, there's the whole pantser plotter debate thing. Yeah. I think 90% of writers fall somewhere on a sliding scale between pure pantser, pure plotter. I like to call myself a pantser with a plan. So what I do is once I have my idea, I'll sit down with a notebook and a pen, and usually a very large thermos or mug of coffee or something. And I'll start with the characters. And I'll start with like my main character, and I will look at pictures on the internet to get an idea of what this person looks like, just kind of cast them, so to speak. And I'll write out, points about their life, or how are they educated, how many did they have both parents growing, just background stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes if it's a particularly interesting character, if I'm having a hard time getting my head around them, I'll actually sit down and I will write out in the character's voice them introducing themselves to me. So for instance, on my last one, there's a pretty unique character in that book named Arlo Dandridge, and he's basically a magical Sherlock Holmes with lots of mental issues. So I sat down and started writing, and I got his voice in my head, his smart-ass, condescending, and I wrote that out so that when I read it, it was like, hello, my name is Arlo Dandridge. I'm a genius. You're not, that kind of thing. And I do that for all the main characters so that I have a really, main characters and the close supporting characters. So I've got a really good feel of those characters and how they would interact with each other. Once that's done, I research where are seen, like my hometown, I had a couple places picked out where I wanted certain events in the story to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So I would like, if I can't find what I need on the internet, I actually drove over to there's a big cemetery in town called Maple Hill Cemetery, and I actually took some pictures and all this stuff. So I sort of scout out location. I kind of approach it like a TV show or a movie. Excuse me. And I do all that pre-work, people, places, things. If there's any objects that are pertinent to the story, I'll do research on those. And then once I've got all of that, I will come up with a beginning and an ending and 3 to 5 plot points that I know I want to hit in between that beginning and that ending. And that's it. I'm ready to start drafting at that point because I know where I'm starting. And then I look at that next plot point I want to hit, and I'm always writing towards that plot point. And once I hit that one, I'm writing towards the next one. I'm always moving forward with those. And basically what that does is it gives me the structure of the story by having those tentpole framework points. I like to call them plot targets. I call the whole process tactical storytelling. But those are my little targets. And as I'm writing, I'm shooting at that target. But between the targets, I have plenty of room for discovery writing. And that's the really fun part. Sometimes the discovery writing will change the plot point a little bit, and that's fine. I don't think anybody should lock themselves into a outline. I mean, if it works for you, great. But, you need to give yourself room to wiggle because sometimes stories go places you don't expect them to. But you still have that structure. You still have that end you're working towards, and that always gives you a goal to be moving forward on. And that's just the method I've come up with over the years.
That's awesome.
Does that work for you? Okay,
yeah.
Good.
Yeah. I really, really like the bit about the, letting the characters, introduce themselves to you. I think that's not something that people that anybody else has shared. And I have a question. Do you look over or do you repeat that process throughout the story at points just to refresh their voice? Or
I will often refer back to those. If I get into a scene, some of the most fun you can have doing that, in my opinion, is when you're writing from the villain's point of view. Because invariably when I'm doing that with the villains, they're going to start trying to explain to me why they aren't villains. Because everybody's the hero of their own story. So sometimes if I've been writing one character for 3 or 4 chapters and I need to jump over into this other character's head, I'll go back and review that if I don't feel like I've got a grasp of what I want, where I want that to go. So yes, I definitely use it over and over again.
That's awesome. Yeah. I like to think that I don't know, I imagine about myself that I give the characters different instruments. Like, or a different song or something to get into so that I have their voice in
like a theme song or something.
Yeah.
There you go. That's
like,
kind of cool. That's a cool idea, actually.
like they're boxers and every time I sit down, okay, it's you're coming out now. And they're like, do.
There you go. To Rocky.
Yes, to whatever their song is. And they were like, okay, I'm ready for my
Dexter music. That's actually the ringtone on my phone.
Oh, nice. Okay. I wanted to ask you about what is some of the biggest challenges that you've worked through on this path of being an author?
Well, as I just outlined, this not feeling obligated to finish a book that I'm not all that excited about writing is a new one. But again, I think I kind of covered how that approach. The biggest thing before that was, how a lot of people will say, I started writing when I was a teenager or whatever, but nobody really cared. Nobody got it. Nobody understood, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I had that, but to an nth degree. I had we'll call it overly dramatic childhood. But when I got it, like the day that I wrote that story and it got all that attention, I was actively discouraged from pursuing writing. There were times, because like after that, I started writing, those little primer notebooks, the little black and white. Yeah. I would write stories in those. And they were usually like Hardy Boy style adventures with me and my best friend as the main characters. And I would have to hide them because the household environment that I had was, you don't do frivolous things like that. You plan on getting a real job when you grow up and that kind of stuff. And, and at one point I watched as those things were taken and destroyed. So I think that was the hardest thing to overcome for me mentally over the years, was that I somehow needed to keep this a secret. That I got over it a long time ago. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But early on, that fear of judgment, that need to, here's this thing I really, really love doing that gives me joy, but I can't tell anybody about it. And for the longest time, I had to live with that. And it took a while for me to kind of get past that block of, I need to do this in secret. I don't want anybody to judge me because I'm not doing whatever the hell it was they thought I was supposed to be doing. So that really is probably my biggest problem. And the other problem is that I'm easily distracted.
And you've got kids, so
yeah.
And I don't mean the kids are a problem. I mean that they are distracting.
No, they are a problem at times.
I'm saying, I mean that they're distracting. I'm sure they're distracting.
They are. Honestly, though, my kids, I've got 3 kids and 3 grandkids. My oldest is 28, and she gave me 3 grandkids. And then I've got a 13-year-old and a 10-year-old. And they're kind of to a point where they're sort of self-sufficient. But I also have 3 dogs, a cat, and a hamster.
Why do you have a hamster?
Rampaging pains in my butt. I'm surprised they haven't started Well, 2 of them I got locked up so they won't bark during this. And the big one is sitting on the couch waiting for the FedEx man to show up so he can go nuts. But I have a hamster because my youngest batted her eyes at me for her birthday. And so we now have Twix the hamster. We've had him for about 3 weeks now.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Bastard bites. I did not know those things bit. He got me right on the cuticle of my pinky and bit the shit out of me.
We had hamsters when I was a kid. They're such a goofy little pet.
Oh my God.
No. And I gave my dog a Kong full of peanut butter just before we got together.
There you go.
I was like, you gotta settle down. You have peanut butter. I want to go back to your first obstacle.
Okay.
Which was I just want to appreciate you for sharing that, because I think
no problem.
I think it's more common than people say, that, you know, they always wanted to do this one thing, and then for whatever reason, whether, you know, people in your lives or what have you, that keep you from doing it. And then I'm curious, like, at what point when you were hiding, you were, you know, secretly writing, which is like, in my mind, I'm like seeing you like this adorable little kid, because every kid like this, every kid is adorable.
I was pretty adorable.
But like every kid is adorable, and they're like, I have this little thing that I'm really excited and passionate about. And then, you know, and when did you, at one point where you're like, you know what, I don't have to hide it anymore? Like, was there some kind of incident, or just gradually, or what?
It was about 1989, 90. I was in the Air Force. I was married to my first wife. My daughter was a little baby, and I was working the night. I was an avionics autopilot specialist in the Air Force. So I worked in like a shop, and then I would get aircraft components and work on them. And we worked a 24-hour rotation, so I was working nights at the time. And nighttime, not a lot to do. So when I had downtime, I'd go into the office and I would use the typewriter. This is, you know, pre-computer days. And so I'm sitting there and I'm banging out a story on my little IBM Selectric there. And Sergeant walks in and he says, "What are you doing?" And I said, you know, I told him, I said, "I'm just writing this little short story because, you know, that's what I like to do." "Oh, let me read it." So I had like 5-6 pages on it done, and I handed them to him. And, you know, he read them. He just stood there, didn't say a word, read them, nodded, handed them back to me. And he said, "Don't ever stop doing that. That is what you were born to do." And then walked out of the shop. And I was like, that was the very first time that anyone had ever said anything like that to me. Even teachers at school would just be like, "Yeah, you're great, go on," you know. But he genuinely looked me in the eye and said, "This is why you're here. This is what you're supposed to do." And that was a really big moment for me. And then I went home that morning and I told my then wife, and she goes, "Well, you just need to keep working. You can play later."
So then
it was that balance between the two things. You know, it was like one was just pure and total support, and the other was like, just, you know what, lip service, shut up and just don't waste your time with this crap anymore. But I'm not going to say that out loud. You know, it was kind of, and at that moment, I sort of realized I don't need that. I need neither approval nor disapproval to do what I love doing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I told, and this may sound a little cynical, but I'm fond of telling my kids and some young friends who come to me for advice every now and then. I'm like, look, it may sound bad, but there's exactly one person in this life that you're stuck with. That's the one you see in the mirror every day. Everyone else is optional. So you better look around, figure out what you love, and live for that. Because that person in the mirror is going to be the one looking back at you 50 years from now. And that's the person you better make sure is happy with how you got there. Quit worrying about the opinions of these other people and focus on what is going to make your life the richest life it can be. So that was that moment where I quit worrying about other people's opinions of my interests and my actions and my loves.
Wow.
So I hope
powerful.
That answers.
Yeah. Oh, that's way powerful. I don't think it sounds cynical. I think it sounds like you're a good dad.
Well, thank you.
I think that sounds like...
Hopefully my kids will agree with you in about 15 years.
I think it sounds like that sergeant, you know, gave you a really big gift.
Yeah, and it just came out of the blue. I mean, you know, it was a big moment for me. It really was.
And then your then wife provided the contrast.
Yep.
Which is, in some ways, if you can be really objective or really like take big picture, also a gift.
Yeah. Well, now I can. At the time,
yeah,
not so much. But months later, when I really look back on it, that's when I kind of came to the conclusion, screw these people. I don't need anybody's approval. You know, I mean,
yeah. I used to be. I had a moment like that where I've run a couple marathons. I'm going to tell a little story. I've run a couple marathons.
Go for it.
And I did one when I was younger, and then I was like, never again. And then 10 years passed, and I was like, maybe it's not that bad. And I did another one. I was like, okay, never again. And then some friends of mine, we were training for a half marathon, and we did it in Ogden a couple years ago. And I'm not joking. It was a monsoon.
Oh no.
Like there's a monsoon and I'm sorry, but you're married and you have daughters, so I was on my period. Okay.
Oh my gosh.
And
that's
so,
not good.
And so we're like 5 miles into it, and I am just like miserable, and I'm freezing and miserable, and I'm like doing this, and I'm like, why am I doing this? I don't have to prove myself to anybody.
Right.
like I've already run 2 marathons. I don't have to be all badass and finish this out. And I mean, I did, because once you start going, it's hard to get you have to get to the end somehow. But at that moment though, it was very powerful, because I was like, I don't have to prove myself to anybody. Like if I don't want to be here, I don't have to be here. If I want to be here, I can, but it's just me. Like you're saying to your kids, it's just me that I have to live with. So
exactly. I mean, everybody else really, at the end of the day, is optional. I mean, it's somebody tried to argue that with me. Well, what about your kids? Well, parents walk away from kids all the time.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not saying that's a good thing to do by any stretch of the imagination, but the point is, there's, it can be done.
Yeah.
So I just,
Yeah, I don't think it's cynical to especially if you have daughters, to want them to put themselves first, because
oh no, I don't. I just I don't raise victims is what I basically say. Is like, look, you're going to know how to take care of yourself. And I also try to tell them, and this is like turning into Papa Chuck's advice hour.
That's
I'm sorry
okay.
about that, but
I like it.
But I try to tell my kids, I'm like, look, you're never going to be okay with somebody else until you're okay by yourself. And then you find somebody else who's okay by themselves, and you just sort of weave those two things together. If you stay in a bad relationship because you're scared to be alone, that's a real problem. And I try my best to raise my kids to where if somebody is mean to them or whatever, they're not afraid to say, well, you know what? It didn't work out. You go your way, I go mine, and have a nice life.
Yeah. I like myself enough to just hang out with myself. Don't need
if I'm not saying I'm not saying being an isolationist, but you need to be okay alone. I get accused of being too okay alone. That's actually, I think, one of my biggest struggles as an author, is because I lived alone for a very long time, and I'm very introverted, despite how I appear sometimes on microphones. But when it comes like face to face, that's when my inner introvert jumps up and kicks me in the squishy bits. But it's hard to. I think that having that kind of being too comfortable with your isolation makes it more difficult to develop relationships with an audience, because it's harder to kind of reach out and kind of put yourself out there and open up to people to try and, because I mean, that, like we said before, with your audience, it's a partnership. And if you can't present yourself in such a way as to say, hey, you can trust me to entertain you for a little while, that's a big hurdle that you have to try and get over as an author. And in a lot of ways, I think that's probably one of my biggest struggles, is just connecting with people on that kind of level. I mean, I can sit here and dispense all advice all day long into a microphone or a webcam, but when it comes to the ask, when it comes to that, hey, try my stuff, I choke every time. Every time.
When you, I'm curious, when you interact with your audience, and I'm not talking about other writers, I'm talking about readers.
Oh, yeah, me either.
Are you doing it on video?
Well, I'm not really doing it, to be honest with you.
Because you're really good at this. You are really good at this. So well, I find that sometimes I coach people with marketing stuff. So sometimes it's the way that you're doing it that's. Anyways, find the way that's most comfortable with you, and for you it might be video.
Yeah, I'm working on that, right? Actually, the closest I've come recently is I've been asking questions in a Facebook fan group for urban fantasy, and I'm not trying to sell anything to these people. I'm genuinely trying to collect data, like, hey, what do you guys consider a good price point for an ebook? Do you prefer male protagonists over female protagonists?
That one.
Did you see that one?
Oh yeah. I was like, for urban fantasy, and I was like, because I read mostly women protagonists, and because I'm a woman, and I'm like, I can't remember. Like I read a little bit of Jim Butcher, and I I wasn't too fond. I was like, meh. Like I could take it or leave it. And so I was really curious to see the response on that. I think, and that is the advice that I give everybody about engaging, is especially if you're an introvert, if you just keep asking questions and being genuinely curious, you're going to get responses.
Well, I am, because I'm actually getting a lot of information that it didn't go the direction I thought it would go. So, and so many times in the indie space, we just end up talking to each other authors, asking each other questions about readers when we should just take the questions directly to them. Yeah. And sometimes that's trickier to do, but But there it is.
It feels trickier, but it's still, they're just people. Just it feels trickier.
For me, it's a bit of a hurdle. Yeah.
Yeah. I just want to acknowledge that what your Chuck's Big Daddy Chuck's advice hour. For me, if I had been able to listen to this podcast when I was younger and have somebody like you giving me that advice, it would have made a huge difference in my ability to go and do what I loved and cared about much earlier. Like if I'd had, I think maybe, I don't know, not for all of the audience, but for sure a good portion of the audience, you just gave permission to do what they want to. Like, you gave them another little bit of permission that they maybe hadn't given themselves yet to do what they love, which is writing books.
Then I encourage younger listeners, anybody out there who's struggling with that, just put it away. Just do what your life, don't go out and, hurt people or anything, but if it's something you love doing, just do it. And other people's opinions do not matter. It's just, make sure you're friends with that person in the mirror. That's the most important thing.
Yeah, I loved it. Okay, so is that an advice that you would give authors who want to be successful, or what advice would you give?
Couple things. Okay. First thing, yes, that if you're struggling with imposter syndrome or with fear of judgment, all that, just sit down and do what you love doing, and don't worry about what everybody else says, thinks, and or wants to put in your face. Just do your thing and make yourself happy doing it. The other thing I'm going to tell, and I help younger writers a lot. I teach classes here locally. I did a podcast called the Story Shots Podcast for a while, where I was just giving craft tips to people who were just coming into writing and storytelling and that sort of thing. The first thing I'm going to tell you is give yourself permission to suck when you're working on your first thing. It's going to suck. That's fine. It's supposed to. If you're new at this, you have to learn and learn the ropes like everybody else does. So write your first book or story or whatever, and just accept going out, there's going to be a lot of flaws in it that need fixing, but finish it. Get from once upon a time to the end, because you can always edit a book or a story and take those rough edges off, fill in the cracks, add here, subtract there, and take that. The Mythbusters proved you can polish a turd. So you can just take that and turn it into something, but you cannot edit a blank page. So don't focus on trying to make your first drafts these pristine, perfect things that make you feel good. Just get it down on paper, and then you can go back and pull the crystals from the crap and make it into the thing you really, really want it to be. That's the first piece of advice.
Mm-hmm.
The second piece of advice is, if you're doing this strictly for the love of writing, you can stop there. Once it's perfect and it's the way you want it, great. If you're doing this because you want to put it out in the world and make money off of it, learn business, because you have to take off the creative hat and put on the business hat. Because at the end of the day, when you're doing this for money, it may be a thing you love. You may do it from a place in your heart that is filled with creativity. But once you're done with it, it's a product. And it's a product that you're trying to get into the hands of people that are going to appreciate it. And that's a business thing. And this is the first time in my life I've ever had to do business. So it's a learning curve. Start early, figure some of that stuff out so that you're ahead of that curve once you get ready to try to sell it. And I have tons of other advice. Look up the Story Shots podcast for craft advice, because I did like 40 some odd episodes of that thing.
Nice. I will. I'm going to put that as a resource for people, and I will put it on. You guys, it'll be in the show notes. What is it? The Story
Shots podcast.
Shots. Awesome. Yeah, that'll be in the show notes, because good writing recommendations and craft stuff.
Yeah, I had to quit doing it because it's just me and a mic. They're about 10, 15 minutes long per episode, and it's just me talking about one aspect of the writing craft. But I had to quit doing them because I wasn't getting any feedback, and I just kind of ran out of things to talk about.
You're like, and that's it.
And
Your book should be done now.
Josh and Scott are kind of slave drivers with the whole keystroke medium thing. I don't think they like me, sharing my time. So.
Oh, yeah, sure.
No, those guys are awesome. They're fantastic, and they're a lot of fun. I just let it bust it.
No, I know. I love those guys. I love the indie author community is so generous. It's it makes me tear up just thinking about it. I love it. Yeah, the whole experience. Even though I don't sell a lot of books, the whole experience is just some of the people I've met are just grade A human beings. I mean, just awesome. Yeah. Well, we'll help. We'll get you there. We'll talk after this recording. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your latest book? And where people can find you.
You can find. I'm all in with Amazon, KU, all that stuff. I went wide for a while. I had to go back to that KU money. Mm-hmm. But my latest book is called Master of Hounds. It's the first book in the Pickman Files Dark Urban Fantasy series, centered around a former U.S. Air Force pararescueman turned emergency room RN who gets thrust into a world of magic and monsters and secret societies and all that fun stuff. So you can get that on Amazon. And I also have a Paragons trilogy, which is also a dark fantasy trilogy that just kind of bumps up against the superhero genre a little bit. I don't think there's a big difference between those two, but that's a whole other topic. We can get into at a later date. And if you like spaceships and aliens and Han Solo and good old-fashioned pulpy space adventure, you can check out my Praise Cordova books. And if you want to know more about me, go to www.cstephenmanley.net. That is Stephen with a V. And you can get free stories and all kinds of stuff there.
Nice. Awesome. Thank you, Chuck. Or Stephen Manley, because that's, what you guys, you won't see him as Chuck anywhere, just here. So, but thank you so much for being here. Really,
it's a genuine pleasure.
Yeah.
Genuine pleasure.
Awesome. And thank you, everybody. Thank you for listening. Hugs and happy authoring here at Author Like a Boss. Hey, boss, you made it to the end of the episode. You're the best. Because of that, I'm going to give you a special invitation to find out more about the Author Boss Academy, where I and a bunch of really awesome authors hang out, have fun, and get stuff done. If you end up joining, tell me the secret word, and you'll get a special bonus. Find out more about the Academy at authorlikeaboss.com/academy. The secret word is nipples. Hugs and happy authoring. I hope to see you soon.
If you love the Author Like a Boss podcast, we'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give a review on iTunes. Until next time.